There are moments in life when the world looks at you and decides what you are before you've had the chance to show it. Maybe you felt that. The quiet dismissal. The eyes that slide right past you because nothing about you announces itself loudly enough. And in those moments, it can feel like the only honest thing to do is believe them. To accept the verdict. To make yourself smaller because the space they've left for you is small. But this is a story about a horse, and a boy, and a race that almost didn't happen, and a truth that neither of them ever forgot. His name was Cale. He was 17 years old the summer his grandfather died and left him three things: a crumbling plot of land on the edge of the Heron Valley, a rusted tin box with 42 coins inside, and a horse that nobody wanted. The horse had no official name. Cale's grandfather had simply called her the Gray One, which wasn't even accurate, because her coat was closer to the color of dry river clay, a faded, dusty brown with patches along her left flank where the hair had grown back unevenly after an old wound. She was small for a racing horse. Not delicate, exactly, but compact. Built low to the ground. Her legs were clean and her eyes were dark and very still. The first time Cale saw her after arriving at the farmhouse following his grandfather's funeral, she was standing alone in the far corner of the paddock. Every other animal had been moved or sold off in the weeks since Edrin's death. The neighbors had been practical about it. Kind, but practical. The larger horses had gone to the Darrow stable. The cart horse to the family 2 farms over. The old sheepdog had gone to live with his grandfather's cousin in town. The Gray One remained. Not because anyone had chosen to keep her, but because no one had made an offer. She had stood in that paddock corner while men and women came and looked and made quick assessments and moved on to things that seemed more worth their time. Cale stood at the fence for a long time that first afternoon. He had driven out from the city where he had been living with his mother for the past 4 years. He hadn't spent a summer at the farmhouse since he was 13. He had expected to feel like a stranger here, and he did. Mostly, the land felt both familiar and foreign at once, the way a childhood memory feels when you stand inside it as an adult and find that the proportions are different from what you remembered. He stood at the fence. He looked at the horse. The horse looked back at him. Neither of them moved for what felt like a very long time. That was how it started. The Heron Valley wasn't rich, but it had its traditions. And the oldest tradition, the one that drew people from 3 counties over, that crowded the roads with carts and horses and the smell of roasted grain and sweet bread, was the Valley Race. It had been run every year for nearly 60 years, suspended only once during a drought so severe that the creek passage dried completely and the course became impassable. 12 miles across open terrain, through the lower grasslands, around the long ridge of Callaway Hill, down through the creek passage where the willows grew thick and the ground stayed wet year-round, and back up the final stretch to the old stone post at the edge of Heron Town. Farms entered horses. Prize money was modest, especially compared to the traveling races held in the larger towns to the north. But reputation was everything here. A win at the Valley Race was a thing a family talked about for a generation. The race had always been won by large horses. Powerful horses. Horses with deep chests and haunches built like storm systems and legs that covered ground in long, sweeping strides. Horses that looked like they had been assembled specifically for the purpose of moving across this valley faster than anything else. When Cale entered the Gray One, people thought it was a mistake. Not a cruel mistake. Not an offensive one. The people of the Heron Valley were, on the whole, decent people. They didn't laugh loudly. They didn't point. The mistake they assumed Cale was making was the quiet kind, the kind a grieving boy makes when sentiment overrides sense, when he enters a horse in a race not because the horse can win, but because the horse belonged to someone he loved and this is the only tribute he knows how to offer. They were sympathetic to this. They understood grief. They had all felt it. They simply didn't think it had much to do with a 12-mile race. The race secretary, a heavy-set man named Pollard who had been recording entries for 11 years and could identify the contenders and the non-contenders within 30 seconds of looking at a horse, looked at the gray one for a long moment before writing her entry down. He didn't say anything. He pressed his lips together in a way that communicated everything a man might want to say without requiring him to say any of it. Then he wrote down the entry, took the fee, and handed Cale the numbered cloth that would be fixed to the saddle. Cale paid the entry fee from his grandfather's tin box. He had 31 coins left. He folded the numbered cloth carefully and put it in his jacket pocket and walked back to where the gray one was tied to a post near the road, and he looked at her for a moment before untying her, and she looked back at him with those dark, quiet eyes, and he could not have told you exactly why, but he felt certain. Not loudly certain. Not in the way confidence sometimes arrives with fireworks and declarations. Quietly certain. The way you feel certain about something that you understand in your body before your mind has fully caught up. His grandfather's name had been Edrin, and he had been a strange and quiet man who kept his wisdom the way some people keep money, not by displaying it, but by spending it only when it genuinely mattered. He had not been a famous horseman. He had not bred champions or won regional titles. He had simply spent 52 years in the Heron Valley paying close attention to animals in land and weather, and he had accumulated an understanding of things that most people never arrived at because they were moving too quickly to notice. Cale had spent his childhood summers at the farmhouse. He had not appreciated the education he was receiving during those years, because it did not look like education. It looked like an old man doing slow ordinary things. Walking fences in the evening. Sitting with a sick animal until it was better or it wasn't. Standing at the edge of the paddock watching nothing in particular with an expression of complete and unhurried attention. He remembered asking his grandfather once why the gray one never ran with the other horses during the morning exercise. The others went out together along the ridge trail. The gray one stayed behind. Edrin had looked at him for a moment. "She doesn't need to," he said. Then he turned and continued walking. Cale had spent years carrying that sentence, turning it over, looking for the angle that revealed what it meant. He had rotated through many explanations. None of them had fit exactly. The summer of the race, he finally began to understand. In the 2 weeks before the race, Cale ran her every morning, alone, at her own pace, across the open land behind the farmhouse. He watched her the way you watch something you were trying to understand. She had no burst, no explosive acceleration. She had something harder to quantify, a consistency so complete it seemed structural, as if it came from somewhere deep in the grain of her. She found a pace and held it the way a river holds its current. Not fighting the ground. Not wasting energy on recovery. Just moving through it the same way she had moved through every morning of her life. He thought about his grandfather. He thought about the sentence that had waited for him all these years. She doesn't need to. He was beginning, finally, to understand. There were 11 other horses entered in the Valley race that year. Cale knew their names and their records the way other boys his age knew the records of fighters or legendary riders. He had asked around, listened carefully, read what notices were posted at the general store and outside the blacksmiths. He knew Dawnfire, the 4-year-old bay gelding who had placed second 3 years running and was rumored to be finally at the peak of his form. He knew Harlock's Pride, a massive gray stallion from the northern farms whose stride was said to cover more ground per step than any horse in the valley. He knew Saren, a young chestnut mare who had been entered for the first time this year after breaking records at 2 regional trials, and who had arrived with the kind of reputation that does the horse's work before the race even begins. He knew all of them. None of them knew the gray one. The morning of the race, Cale arrived early. He groomed the horse with the patient attention his grandfather had demonstrated on countless mornings, working in warm, methodical strokes, checking the legs carefully with both hands, watching the way she breathed, noting whether her ears moved with interest or tension. She was calm. Her breathing was even. She stood through the whole process without fidgeting, and when he was done, she turned her head and looked at him with those dark, still eyes, and something in him settled. The other riders began to arrive around mid-morning. They came the way experienced competitors arrive at familiar ground, efficiently, without fuss, with the practiced ease of people who have done a thing many times and carry that repetition as a kind of armor. Well-maintained tack. Horses that moved with the physical confidence of animals conditioned specifically for today. Riders who moved with the casual authority of people who have long since stopped needing to prove themselves to anyone watching. Cale watched them from across the staging area without moving. Vasson rode Dawnfire. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 30s, a veteran of the Valley race who wore his experience the way some men wear good boots, not loudly, but you noticed. He moved through the staging area without looking at anyone for too long, checking his equipment, speaking quietly to the horse, contained in himself. When his eyes passed over the gray one and then up to Cale, his expression did not change noticeably. He looked, registered, and moved on. It was the particular dismissal of someone who has already filed you under things that do not require further consideration. Cale held the look for a moment, then turned back to his horse. The crowd gathered along the starting ridge in the cheerful, unhurried way that belongs to events that feel genuinely local, not televised, not commercial, but belonging to the people watching in a way that a larger event never quite achieves. Families had come in from the outlying farms. Children perched on fence posts and cartwheels for better sight lines. The smell of food stalls moved through the field on the dry summer wind, mixing with the sharper smell of late summer grass and horse and leather. The race marshal was a thin, precise man named Hollis who had held the position for 7 years. He walked the line of horses with the careful attention of a man who takes his work seriously and knows the value of that seriousness. He checked equipment. He checked temperament. He spoke quietly to several of the riders. When he reached the gray one and Cale, he paused a moment longer than he had paused at the others. He looked at the horse from the near side, then moved around the front to look from the other. "You've entered the Valley race before?" he asked Cale. "No," Cale said. Hollis studied him briefly. "Your grandfather entered this race," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Cale said. Hollis nodded once, slowly, as if something had been confirmed. He looked at the gray one once more. Then he moved on down the line without another word. The laughter, when it came, was low and social. A murmur passing between people standing at the fence near the starting post when the horses were ranged for the off. Someone made a remark to someone else. A few people nearby smiled, looking at the small clay-colored horse standing compact and quiet between two animals that were visibly larger in every dimension. It was not malicious laughter. It was the comfortable laughter of shared certainty. The kind that binds a crowd together around a common understanding of how things work. Cale heard it. He had not expected to be surprised by it, and he wasn't. He had been hearing some version of it for the past 2 weeks, whenever he brought the gray one into town, whenever he spoke to anyone about the race. The sound of it landed on him the same way it always did, not crushing, but present. A weight. Small, but real. He kept his eyes forward. The signal came. In the first quarter mile, the race looked exactly like everyone watching from the fence had predicted it would look. Dawnfire broke from the line with the explosive authority of a horse that has been built and conditioned and prepared for exactly this moment. His stride was enormous, his rhythm immediate, the ground disappearing beneath him with a mechanical confidence that made the watching crowd release a collective sound of appreciation. Harlock's pride matched him on the outside, slower off the line but enormous once in motion, a physical presence so significant that the other horses near him adjusted their lines instinctively. Saren moved to the inside track, her rider already working, already thinking ahead, positioning for the first turn with the cold precision of someone who has studied this course and has a plan for every section. The gray one was 8th. Not last. But not in the conversation. Cale felt the distance between himself and the front of the field as a physical sensation, not panic, but pressure. The competitive instinct pulling at him. The voice in the back of the mind that says push now, push hard, you're already behind. He had felt that voice the first morning he had run her alone, and he had sat with it until it quieted, and he sat with it now. He did not ask for more. He kept his hands quiet. He stayed with what she was giving him. And what she was giving him was a pace so consistent it felt almost meditative. No surge. No adjustment. Just the same unwavering rhythm that she had settled into within the first 50 yards and had not varied from since. It felt almost like stillness, riding her. It felt like being very calm in the middle of something that was not calm. It felt, he thought, like how his grandfather must have felt standing at the edge of the paddock in the evening. Like being the still thing in the center of motion. The grassland stretched ahead, rolling gently, the course marked by painted posts set at intervals. The sky was clear and hard and high, the kind of summer sky that turns the colors of the land very precise. The heat was coming up already from the earth, not oppressive yet but present, and Cale could feel it on his arms and the back of his neck. He watched the leaders. He watched them the way his grandfather had watched things, not urgently, but attentively. Looking for information. At mile 2, the first information arrived. Dawnfire's stride had shortened. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would be obvious to everyone watching from the fence line. But Cale was behind him and he could see it, the slight compression of the step, the subtle change in the way the horse was meeting the ground, the early language of an animal beginning to negotiate between what it is being asked to do and what it currently has available. It was mile 2 of 12. The approach to Callaway Hill began at mile 3, where the grassland terrain transitioned from level to rising. The hill was not severe in angle, but it was unrelenting. 2/3 of a mile of sustained climb, loose on the outer edges where the vegetation was thin, harder and more packed in the center where generations of hoofs had compressed the soil into something close to stone. Experienced riders moved to the center line here. Less experienced ones, or riders with horses that had too much speed and not enough sense, drifted wide and found the loose ground and spent energy correcting for it. Cale kept the gray one on the center track. She began the climb with no change in her manner. The same stride, the same rhythm, the same quality of effort that contained no drama and no waste. She did not treat the hill as a problem to be overcome. She treated it as terrain to be moved through at exactly the pace she had been moving through everything else. Ahead of them, the picture was changing. Harlock's pride had moved past Dawnfire on the right side of the climb. His size, which had been an asset on the open flat, was beginning to work against him in a different way here, not because he lacked power, but because maintaining his pace required more power now, and the expenditure was visible. His rider was working, leaning in, asking. Dawnfire was fading. Not dramatically. Gradually. The way a candle dims as it burns down, the light still present, but the brightness going out of it. Saren was running the most intelligent race of the three. Her rider had held something back in the first 2 miles and was now calling on it, moving up the right side of the hill with a purposefulness that was controlled and impressive. She was 5 lengths ahead of Cale at the base of the climb and 4 by the middle of it. She was smart and she was being ridden smartly, and Cale acknowledged that without feeling threatened by it. He watched the hill. He watched the gray one's ears moving, tracking the sounds ahead. By the crest of Callaway Hill, Cale had moved to 1 length behind Saren. He had not asked for it. He had simply stayed constant while the terrain sorted things out around him. The descent from the hill brought a change in the sound, the faint crowd noise from the valley below, rising and falling on the wind like something breathing. The ground shifted from packed clay to looser soil as the course bent left toward the creek passage. The creek passage was the section of the valley race that separated it from a simple speed contest. Half a mile of narrow track between overhanging willows, the ground permanently soft in the shaded sections, the track itself no wider than 2 horses at most points. The willows here were old and grew in close, their trailing branches brushing riders' shoulders. The ground under them was a dark, rich wet, not quite mud in summer, but yielding in a way that changed everything about how a horse moved through it. Big horses suffered here. Not because they were weak, but because their size imposed costs that didn't show up in open country. A longer stride covering more ground also meant a more forceful impact on yielding ground, which meant more recovery per step, which meant more energy, which meant the math of the race changing in ways that added up hard over distance. The gray one entered the creek passage and found her element. She moved through it with an economy that was almost eerie to witness from the saddle. Cale felt it more than saw it, felt the way she was reading the ground and choosing the firm patches instinctively, sidestepping the deep sections without breaking rhythm, her feet placing themselves with a precision that required no conscious guidance from him because it was already happening below him. She was doing what she had always done on the soft ground at the edge of the farmhouse property. She was being exactly what she was, on exactly the ground that asked for it. They emerged from the willow section into the open ground that preceded the final stretch, and Cale was alongside Saren. He could hear the mare's breathing clearly now. Heavy. Not panicked, but extended. The breathing of an animal that has been spending from a budget that was now running toward its lower figures. Ahead of them, Dawnfire and Harlock's Pride were running side by side, their riders both active now in the particular way that riders become active when they are asking their horses for more than the horses are naturally offering. Asking in the language of leg and hand and weight. Not cruelty, none of it was cruelty. Just the urgent conversation between a person and an animal when what is required is more than what easily remains. The final stretch was 1.5 miles of open grass rising gently toward the stone post at the edge of Herontown. The grass was dry and the footing was firm, and the afternoon light was falling at an angle that lit the whole scene with the particular gold of late summer. Cale breathed once. He asked. Not loudly. Not desperately. Just a quiet shift in weight, a slight softening in the hands, a signal so small it would have been invisible to anyone watching. The language of 2 beings that have learned each other well enough to communicate in what most people would call nothing at all. The gray one heard it. She stretched. Not all at once. It happened gradually, like something that had been stored very carefully and was now, carefully, being opened. The stride lengthened. Not explosively, there was no burst, no dramatic shift in speed. Just an expansion of what she was already doing, as if she had been running at a particular setting and it had been moved, incrementally, a single notch forward. And then another. She was not a different horse. She was more of the horse she had always been, the parver that had been conserved and maintained and kept in reserve through the grasslands and the hill and the creek passage, through every moment when the other horses around her had been spending freely. She had been saving this. Not through strategy, not through intelligence in the way humans mean intelligence, but through the deep structural efficiency that had been built into her, by breeding, by training, by something her grandfather had understood and shaped and left intact. At the half-mile mark, Cale passed Saren. At the quarter-mile mark, he was alongside Harlock's Pride. The crowd at the finish was visible now. The stone post. The flags. The faces. The sound hit him as a physical pressure, a wall of noise that the wind was shaping into something dense and directional, pouring toward him down the stretch. Dawnfire was in front. Vassen's hands were low and urgent, asking everything, calling on whatever remained. Dawnfire was running with everything he had. It was beautiful, actually, the unqualified effort of an animal giving all of itself to the thing it was built for. Cale did not take satisfaction in what was about to happen. He felt, instead, a kind of quiet recognition. The feeling of something arriving that had always been going to arrive. The Grey One moved past Dawnfire in the final 200 yards. Not with a surge. With a continuation. The steady, unwavering continuation of something that had been running its race since the first stride and was still, simply, running it. They crossed the post. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then the crowd found itself, and the sound came back, different in quality from the sounds that had preceded the race. Less certainty in it. More question. The sound of people revising something quickly and not quite knowing where to put the revision. You could hear it. You could hear the story changing in the air. Cale sat on the Grey One and felt her breathing beneath him. Even. Steady. The breathing of an animal that has done its work and is resting now without distress. No trembling. No labored heaving. She breathed like someone setting down a weight they had been carrying at a comfortable pace and finding that the setting down required no drama. He leaned forward and put his hand on her neck. "Good girl," he said quietly. She moved her ears. Vasson rode past on Dawnfire. He did not stop. His expression, in the brief moment when Cale could see it clearly, was not angry. Not gracious either. It was the expression of a man who was doing intensive, private calculation, reassessing something he was very confident in and finding the confidence to have been misplaced. He rode past without acknowledging Cale, and it was not rude, exactly. It was simply the dignity of a man who needed a moment before he was ready to speak. The race marshal, Hollis, approached on foot. He had a red ribbon in one hand and a short braided cord for the presentation. He looked up at Cale with an expression that combined the official with something more personal, the look of a man who has watched many races over many years and has learned to recognize the ones that are different from the others. "Well run," he said simply. He reached up and affixed the ribbon to the bridle. Cale thanked him. He looked back at the course they had come from. 12 miles of valley land in the afternoon light. The grasslands, the hill, the creek passage. The distance looked different from this end of it. It always does. And if you're still here with this story, maybe you already understand something of what the Grey One knew. About running your own race, on your own ground, at your own pace. You can leave a like if this reached you, or simply stay a while longer. You belong here just as much as anyone. Later, when the afternoon had settled and the last of the crowd was dispersing into the amber light of early evening, Cale sat against the fence at the far edge of the field and watched the Grey One graze. She moved slowly through the grass, head down, unhurried, finding what she needed. He thought about his grandfather. About the long evening walks along the fence line. About the patience that seemed to have no limit. About the sentence that had waited for him all these years. She doesn't need to. He understood it now, fully, finally. It wasn't about the horse being superior to the others. It wasn't about restraint as a tactic. It was about a different kind of knowing. The Grey One did not run with the others in the morning because she was not running against them. She had never been running against them. She had been running the race she was made to run, at the pace that expressed what she truly was. The others might be faster in a burst. Larger and louder and more immediately impressive. None of that mattered when the race was 12 miles long and the terrain was the Heron Valley. She had always been built for this. And his grandfather had known it, had seen it early, and spent years letting her become it without interference. Without measuring her against standards that didn't apply to her. The harder wisdom was not recognizing what she was. It was the restraint of not trying to change it. He sat against the fence until the light was nearly gone. Then he got up and led her home. The years that followed were not all victories. Kale entered the Grey One and 4 more races that season and placed in 3. She finished second twice and fourth once on a flat open course that gave no advantage to consistency over raw speed. The 4th place finish troubled him more than it should have. He said so to Darrow, who had watched the Valley race from the fence and had begun appearing at the farmhouse with quiet regularity. Darrow said, "Losing is not the same as being wrong. Some races aren't yours. Some ground doesn't suit your animal. You ride there, you learn what you learn, and you don't confuse the result for a verdict on the horse. The territory matters. Your job is to know what ground this animal is built for, and to refuse to let the wrong fit make you doubt what you know to be true." The Valley race became one of the fixed points in Kale's year. He entered the Grey One 3 more times. She won once more and placed in the other 2. She was never dismissed again the way she had been that first morning. The race community has a long and specific memory, and it adjusts itself, eventually, in the face of things it cannot explain away. But the dismissal had mattered to Kale, and he held on to it. Not out of bitterness, because it had taught him something real. Not about the limits of other people's perception, which was the easy lesson. About his own response to doubt. About the discipline required to move forward with quiet certainty when everything around you is already decided on a different outcome. He had held that certainty at the starting post. Not perfectly, not without effort, but he had held it. That was the thing worth carrying forward. The Grey One died in late autumn, the year Kale turned 28. She had been slowing for 2 seasons. Not in distress, just aging the way honest things age when they have lived fully and without waste. She spent her final months in the far paddock behind the farmhouse, the same corner where Kale had first seen her standing alone all those years ago. He was with her at the end. He had gotten up before first light and found her lying down in the frost-burl grass. Her breathing was different, not labored, but changed in some quality that belonged to endings. He sat down beside her and she did not move, and he did not ask her to. The morning came up over Callaway Hill the way it always did, slowly, the light turning from blue to pearl to gold. The frost turned bright as the sun reached it. The whole field was briefly luminous. The Grey One lay in that light and breathed, and then she did not breathe. He sat for a long time without moving. She had been, in some way he never found the exact language for, the continuation of his grandfather. She had carried something of Edrin in her, in the patience she had extended to Kale without reservation, in the steady, unhurried way she had moved through every year they had shared. She had been his education. The lesson that arrived in the shape of an animal and unfolded slowly until he understood it in all its dimensions. He buried her at the boundary of the property, near the old fence where the willows grew, the place where cultivated land met wild, which seemed like the kind of place she would have chosen. He planted a young oak tree nearby. Not as a monument, just because it seemed right to put something living there that would grow slowly and last a long time and not make a performance of any of it. The oak is still there. Kale tends it the way his grandfather tended things. With attention, in patience, and without needing anyone else to understand why. There is a version of this story that moves quickly. The underdog horse. The doubters. The unexpected win. It compresses into a clean and satisfying shape, easy to carry, easy to share, and people find something in it, the shape of the arc, the feeling of the turn, the moment when the thing that was supposed to be impossible turns out to have simply been misunderstood. That version is real. It happened. But the version worth the full telling is longer than that. It is about a boy who had to learn to be still in the middle of noise. A horse that never wasted anything. An old man who understood that the most powerful things are often the quietest ones, and that you cannot teach that by explaining it. You can only demonstrate it, day after day, until the person watching has no choice but to feel it. It is about the courage of not chasing, of watching the field pull away and choosing, deliberately, to stay with what you trust. That sounds simple. It is not simple when you are living it. It requires something to trust, and building that trust the way all real trust is built, through time, attention, and the unglamorous work of the small ordinary moments before the race begins. It is about knowing your ground, not as a phrase, as a specific, lived understanding of what terrain you are built for, what pace is truly yours, and the faith to run that race even when everyone watching has already decided the outcome. It is about a gray horse who moved through a valley in summer and was everything she needed to be. It is about an old man who knew it, kept it safe, and left it for someone who was not yet ready to understand, but would be, in time, on exactly the ground that had been quietly prepared for him. It is about the morning Cale finally did. If this story stayed with you, you can leave a like or share what it brought up for you in the comments. And if you'd like to return to stories like this one, unhurried, and human, and worth the time, you can join us by subscribing. We'll be here